Do you struggle with procrastination and the goals that you really care about keep getting pushed to later? And your deadlines keep creeping closer and you can't even seem to get started? And even simple tasks start to feel heavy and overwhelming for no clear reason. And this can look like a willpower issue and a laziness issue, but it's neither of those two things. Instead, what if I told you that when you're procrastinating, you're actually sending a very important message to yourself? And when you learn how to understand that message that you're sending to yourself and truly listen to it, you can easily let go of procrastination. Now, it's very common for people to misunderstand procrastination, and oftentimes they'll look at procrastination like, oh no, I'm just lazy, this is a motivation issue, this is a laziness issue. They might think, oh, I need more willpower, or I need more discipline, I need a better time management schedule, I need to build better habits. But the problem here is that's actually a misdiagnosis. Procrastination is actually something that's a little bit deeper than that. And if we try to just sort of throw more willpower at it, or we try to create habits or build time management systems, those are just sort of fighting with the symptom and not actually addressing the root cause. But if you shift your perspective on what procrastination is, and instead of looking at it as a character flaw that needs to be overcome, and instead start looking at it as a message that you're sending to yourself, you can then start to really understand where that deeper pattern is coming from. And with every single instance of procrastination, there's always a message coming from an unconscious part of yourself. A part of yourself that has an objection and says, whoa, 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 I don't feel comfortable working towards this goal, and here's what you have to do in order for me to feel comfortable getting on board with working towards this goal. For example, there was a time 4 or 5 years ago when I was working on my other channel, The Diamond Net, where I would just stall out. I would only be able to do the bare minimum, and I really wasn't doing anything to grow myself in other ways, with that business and with that channel. And a big part of that is that I had mindsets that had a lot to do with obligation and doing things all by myself. And I would even tell myself, oh, I really need to work on this. If I don't do it, no one else is going to do it. And while of course that's true from certain angles, I am the one that's working toward my business. If I don't make my business go, or if I don't make my channel go, it's just not going to happen. But in saying that to myself, it was reinforcing an earlier pattern, a pattern that was set up in childhood where I felt like I had to do everything perfectly and I had to do all of the scary things alone. And so whenever I would tell myself that, oh, I have to do this, or if I don't do this, then no one's going to bring it forward, it would just hit that trigger from the past. And what would end up happening is part of me would just slam on the brakes and wouldn't let me move forward in the direction of that goal. And within that, there was an objection and there was a request that I was giving to myself to actually shift my paradigm and start thinking about my goal as something that's a want to do instead of a have to do. And also to shift my paradigm to one where I don't feel totally alone. For example, being able to operate through a paradigm where I feel like the universe itself is helping me move towards my goal, and my goal isn't just all on my own shoulders, but as a co-creation with the universe, really helped me to let go of the intense pressure and the repeat of that sense of having to do the things alone. It was also requesting for me to seek support from other people. That way, it's like I can start building out a team, and I can start, let's say, relying on other people instead of repeating that pattern of having to do everything alone. And once I was able to understand the message that my procrastination was sending to me, which was, hey, the way you're thinking about this is way too overwhelming. Please change the way you're approaching this and thinking about this. Once I actually started to listen to that and actually started to make the changes necessary, I stopped dealing with that work avoidance and procrastination cycle. And that's precisely what I mean when I say that procrastination contains a message for you. It's a message with a request for you to change your mindsets, or to change the way that you're approaching things, or to make some kind of internal shift that enables you to move forward without the part of you that's trying to hold you back feeling overwhelmed or afraid, or whatever it happens to be that part of you is trying to protect you from. Another example that I could give was something that happened several years ago when I was working with a client that kept procrastinating for several decades to get started with painting. They had always wanted to, start drawing and painting, and they had this real creative spark, but they kept giving themselves all kinds of rationalizations like, oh, I don't have the space for it, or it'll be too messy. But in actuality, in a deeper exploration, emotion there. There was something else that was making them feel very uncomfortable. And so whenever they were procrastinating, they were actually sending themselves a message. And in that case, the message they were sending themselves through their procrastination was that there was some kind of deeper discomfort with expressing themselves externally. Like if they start expressing themselves, either through painting or through other types of media, what might happen is maybe there's going to be a judgment, or maybe there's going to be a misunderstanding. And so because the message in the procrastination is, whoa, I don't feel comfortable about this, what if we're misunderstood? Then it gets to a deeper exploration of like, okay, what's so bad about being misunderstood? If my client is misunderstood, why is that bad for them? And being able to really understand the deeper underlying reasons for that actually shows where the vulnerabilities are and where my client needed to make those shifts in order to allow themselves to be more expressive and to start painting and to start drawing, which they did and had incredible talent for it, even though they had not done it before. And so in that instance, the top level thing was just the rationalization, like, oh no, it's too messy, not enough space. Deeper down, there was a discomfort with being misunderstood. And so the ways that we were able to go in and resolve that dynamic is by understanding why being misunderstood was so negative for him. And what we found is that it was something that came up a long time before then. And just making that conscious, he was able to actually separate out that earlier experience of being misunderstood by his parents in childhood and in teenhood. And let's say maybe potentially being able to put himself out there and to be understood by other people through what he expresses. And so as much as it felt like, oh, if I put this out there, I'm going to be misunderstood, we could kind of shift it to where he could see that there's an angle through which to be understood by other people through that expression. Yet another instance of a past client who struggled with procrastination tended to operate through the belief that in order for them to start being consistent, that they have to bring the quality of their work up to a certain level first and then make that consistent. And so it's almost like they were like, okay, I can't start being consistent until I get to this high standard. Then once I get to that high standard, I can then start being consistent. But it's actually the other way around. In order for us to be consistent, we have to be very, very dedicated, but to allow ourselves to, have some margin of error when it comes to our work. If we feel like everything, it has to be the highest level all the time, what's going to happen is that's going to be overwhelming for so many different people. And so it's important to set a habit of consistency first, and then excellence can be a stretch goal in on top of that. And so whenever they were procrastinating, it was part of them telling them that they have unrealistic expectations. So being able to shift their mindset was necessary to where they could, let's say, instead of being a perfectionist that avoids work all of the time, they could instead dedicate themselves to show up no matter what, even if they're showing up at just 70% capacity or 60% capacity. And so those are just several examples of this pattern that I've encountered in my time as a coach, and then just also in my time living as a human being. And if you can figure out what the message is that your procrastination is trying to tell to you, you can actually resolve those deeper underlying root causes like I did and like my clients did in those examples. Now, if all of this is resonating with you so far and you want to learn more about how to overcome procrastination, I highly recommend checking out my free webinar, 3 Shadow Work Secrets to Get Out of Your Own Way and Reach Your Full Potential Without Having to Fight Yourself. And the link is down below in the description box. Also, if you would like to work with me, I have an application down below in the description box as well. Now, you might be wondering at this point, how do I actually start to decode the message that I'm sending to myself through my procrastination? Well, I have 2 simple questions that you can ask yourself to start contemplating into this. So the first question is, how am I trying to protect or serve myself by procrastinating? And there can be a variety of different ways that you're trying to protect yourself through procrastinating. So for example, maybe you're procrastinating on starting a business in order to avoid being judged by others. Or maybe you're procrastinating on that new creative project because, like my client, you're afraid of being misunderstood. Or maybe you're procrastinating on those new health goals because you have a mindset that it's all or nothing. Or maybe you're procrastinating on your work because you're operating in a misaligned way. And so part of you is trying to protect you from operating in a way that isn't authentic to you. And once you understand how you're trying trying to protect or serve yourself by procrastinating, you can even contemplate deeper into that by asking yourself, okay, well, why would that be so bad? Or why? Or what would that mean? What would that mean about me? And so there's a variety of different laddering questions that you can ask yourself to understand that on a deeper level. Now, the second question that you can ask yourself to understand why you're procrastinating is to ask yourself, what am I requesting of myself right now? What is it that I am asking myself to change when I'm procrastinating? So if you can think about your goal that you're trying to work on and that you're procrastinating on as an idea that your conscious mind has come up with, and then another part of yourself, an unconscious part of yourself, comes up and poses an objection and says, whoa, I don't want to move forward on that goal. And that's the part of you that's responsible for procrastinating. And so it's really understanding, why is that part of me objecting, and what is it requesting from me as the conscious personality, or as the part of me with the executive function. For example, if I'm procrastinating working on my business and I ask myself, how am I trying to protect or serve myself by procrastinating on my business? Maybe there's a fear of exposure and some fear of eyeballs being on me. And so I would want to ask, okay, well, what would be so bad if there were eyeballs on me? It's like, okay, well, maybe I'd be seen as a fraud, or maybe I'd be misunderstood, or maybe I'd be scrutinized in some way. And maybe I find out that it's because I'm trying to avoid the judgment of others. So let's say it's that. So I'm trying to avoid scrutiny and judgment of others that might come along with the success that I'm seeking in my business. And so then I ask myself, what am I requesting from myself by standing in my own way, by procrastinating on this thing, and by trying to avoid being judged by others? Well, one thing that I might be requesting of myself is to make sure that I have people in my life, like a support system of people that aren't going to judge me and are going to encourage me, and if I do fail, that are going to be there for me no matter what. Or maybe it's the case that I tend to judge myself very harshly internally, and so that part of me might be requesting for me to stop the internal judgment. Because here's the thing, if I, let's say, go out there and I'm in business and I have some kind of failure or misstep and other people judge me, and that activates my own internal judge, then I'm on the chopping block of my own judgments, then that's going to probably be very painful. And so that part of me might be requesting for me to dismantle the inner judge that's been there as a kind of protection mechanism the entire time to try to police me and to stop me from being scrutinized by others. But now it becomes its own issue. And if I'm on the chopping block of my own judgment, that could be quite painful and quite shame-inducing. And so that part of me that procrastinates might be alerting me to that issue so that I can actually resolve that internal dynamic and let go of the inner criticism. And to be more kind to myself and understanding of myself if I run into bumps in the road along the way when working on my business. And so those two questions of how am I trying to protect or serve myself by procrastinating, and also what am I requesting of myself when I procrastinate, can be very, very helpful for understanding the deeper roots of the procrastination and to help you resolve that underlying deeper root of the procrastination so that you no longer need to procrastinate. And the things that you could be requesting of yourself is you might be requesting a mindset shift, an identity shift, a worldview shift. You might be requesting for yourself to be with and feel a certain feeling state. You might be requesting that you let go of internal judgment and to accept yourself unconditionally. You might be requesting of yourself to make some external change, like maybe you need to develop a stronger support system or have people in your corner who are really rooting for you. Or the procrastination might be because you're misaligned, and in that case you need to create a more aligned goal or a more aligned way of going about achieving that goal, or potentially even more aligned mindsets around achieving that goal. Or you might be using procrastination to request a better awareness of your boundaries and also more communication of those boundaries, and to avoid going over particular boundaries that you might not yet be aware of. Or perhaps it's the case that you're requesting of yourself to meet certain needs that you're not consciously aware of, or that you're not consciously and deliberately moving in the direction of. And those are just a handful of different requests that you could be making of yourself. And so when you ask yourself, what am I trying to request of myself, that little list there could be quite helpful for understanding what it is, but it's by no means an exhaustive list. And if you would like to learn more about how to overcome procrastination and self-sabotage and other things that hold you back on your path toward your big goals, I highly recommend checking out this video right here.